It's the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert. Last week, Edward Leung, a Hong Kong independence activist, was sentenced to 6 years in prison for his involvement in riots and protests that took place in Hong Kong 2 years ago. 2 other protesters were also sentenced to 7 years and to 3.5 years in prison. Even though he is only 27 years old, Leung is one of Hong Kong's best-known independence activists. Back in 2016, he ran for Hong Kong's Legislative Council, but was barred from running. His movement, known as Hong Kong Indigenous, emerged out of the 2014 so-called umbrella protests. Here's a clip of Edward Leung before his arrest.
I think we have to be confident that someday things will be changed. And the hard work we are doing today, someday we will get paid.
Even if it's not in your lifetime or anyone else?
Yes, because well, I think it is the only thing we could do. And if we have already do the best we could do today, then I will be happy about it. I have fulfilled my responsibility as a Hong Kong citizen.
Joining me to discuss what Edward Leung's sentencing means for Hong Kong are Starrs and Polaris Tang. Sean is Assistant Professor of International Relations, Department of Asian and International Studies at the City University of Hong Kong. Polaris is a student and activist also at the City University of Hong Kong. Polaris has been a member of the group known as Scholarism since 2012, a group that successfully campaigned for the abolition of the Sinocentric National Education Program in Hong Kong. They both join us from Washington, D.C., where they are on a visit. Thanks for being with us today, Sean and Polaris.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's start with you, Polaris. Give us a little bit more background. Who is Edward Leung and what has he been protesting for?
Edward Leung is a localist activist because he wants to strive for the city independence and strive for the identity of Hong Kongers. And he's famous by in 2015, there's by election of New Territories East in the Legislative Council, and he was famous for he is the representative of the Hong Kong Indigenous group.
So, and what does this sentencing and conviction mean for Hong Kong's independence movement, would you say, Polaris?
I think the Hong Kong government will want to damage the young politician to enter to Legislative Council. Until now, there are 6 politicians punished by the Judicial Council. That's a very harsh punishment, including Effie Ng and Wei-Fo Wong from the Legislature of Social Democrats, and Joshua Wong from Demosisto, and Yao Wei-cheng and Bajio Leung from Young Inspiration.
So, Sean, give us some more context. Is this penalty for Edward Leung a form of political persecution, or could there be more to it if these protests that were organized were indeed became violent and some form of rioting? Or is this mainly to silence him? And if so, then is the independence movement really threatening Beijing's control over Hong Kong? Or what is it exactly that Beijing is afraid of?
Yeah, I think this is nothing short of Xi Jinping trying to crush the independence movement. I mean, he said as much July 1st last year, 2017, he visited Hong Kong for the first time as president of China. And he said that he will not allow anyone to cross the red line of Hong Kong independence. So if we compare to, for example, the 1967 riots, which was, it lasted 8 months, about 50 people were killed, hundreds were injured, and no one got a 6-year prison sentence. So this is the harshest prison sentence that any activist has ever faced in Hong Kong's relatively short history. So I think this is a clear signal from Xi Jinping that there will be zero tolerance. And as part of his broader crackdown, both within China itself, on Taiwan, and there's all kinds of problems that China's having now. Border disputes with almost every neighbor and so on, and now increasing trade war with Trump. So he's responding to all of this by zero tolerance, complete repression.
So turning to you again, Polaris, what do you make of the tactics that Leung's movement is accused of using? If they do involve property destruction, and apparently he did confess to assaulting a police officer at one point, don't they open themselves up to this kind of prosecution? I mean, wouldn't a nonviolent kind of protest be more effective?
I think the violent and non-violent movement, the government want to ban all the social movement about the nation's sovereignty affected to the PCR government, the central government, the Beijing, because that's threaten the national sovereignty, so that not even the non-violent movements such as the umbrella movement, Joshua Wong, Alex Child, and Nathan Law also facing about 1 year in prison.
So Sean, tell us some more about the degree of control that Beijing has over Hong Kong. After all, it's supposed to be two systems in one country since 1997, when Britain turned Hong Kong back over to China. And how has the independence movement factored into Beijing's control over Hong Kong?
Yeah, so Chris Patten was the last British governor of Hong Kong. In the early 90s, he helped to implement what's called the Basic Law, so it's sort of Hong Kong's mini constitution. So it guarantees a bunch of things: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, but also judicial independence. And so the Chinese security services are now allowed to operate in Hong Kong. But we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years, Beijing more and more contravening this mini constitution. So for example, there were 4 booksellers that were kidnapped from Hong Kong. So Chinese security services crossed the border, which was illegal, and then they kidnapped them back to the mainland and detained them. Last year, the first day of Chinese New Year, they even kidnapped a billionaire, a mainlander billionaire, from his hotel room in the middle of the night. And then they're increasingly focusing on what's called patriotic education, which is, of course, what they've been doing in the mainland for a long time, but sort of trying to inculcate love for the Chinese Communist Party, for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, the Chinese dream. So Xi Jinping has all these slogans. So it's and Hong Kong, independence in Hong Kong, or the movement towards independence, is a real threat to Xi Jinping's power. So, as probably everyone knows, I mean, Xi Jinping eliminated the presidential term limit, so he now plans to potentially rule for life. And since about 2015, he's been really cracking down on all dissent, including in the mainland. So Hong Kong is still relatively free. It's still a beacon of activism. So lots of labor NGOs, environmental NGOs, feminist NGOs have now they found final refuge in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is the last sort of territory in China proper that you're still able to protest. So he's really cracking down, I think, hard to make sure that the spirit is crushed.
So finally, Polaris, I don't know to what extent you are free to answer this question, but as an activist yourself, what would you like to see for Hong Kong's political and economic future?
I think that Eric Leung's example shows that the punishment of the communist government will be much harsher, because there's only one of many examples that Hong Kong government using the law to intimidate the pro-democracy movement and curtail the freedom of expressions. So I think that there's an unacceptable crackdown, which is a chilling effect on the pro-democracy movement and forcing people to self-censorship, and silencing the oppositions. So I feel negative of the Hong Kong political future.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there for now. I was speaking to Sean Starrs, Assistant Professor of International Relations at the City University of Hong Kong, and to Polaris Tang, a student and activist at the City University of Hong Kong. Thanks again, Sean and Polaris, for having joined us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network. Also, if you like stories such as this one, I want to remind you that we recently started our summer fundraiser and need your help to reach our goal of raising $200,000. Every dollar that you donate will be matched. Unlike practically all other news outlets, we do not accept support from governments or corporations. Please do what you can today.